Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Uniting for Workplace Parity. It's a partnered effort between the Employee Rights Center and the Kim Center for Social Balance. I'm Dr. Hei-ock, Executive Director of the Kim Center. We're a nonprofit dedicated to accelerating the achievement of equal status for all employees in the workplace through collaborative effort. Our LEAPS initiative unites communities around a structured program of rigorous assessment, targeted action, and standardized accountability. With me is Alor Calderon, Director of the Employee Rights Center.
Hi, my apologies for that small delay. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this monthly episode of this ongoing discussion that we hope will last for a long, long time. We are very supportive of Dr. Hei-ock's work with the Kim Center. We're very supportive of all your legislative work. We need laws like AB 1192 to really make a difference. From the Employee Rights Center perspective, workers need more information, need more tools to feel that they have better opportunities to have more power. We have unions, we have associations, we have legislation. We need all of us to get together and do more for equity and equal status. So thank you very much for being here. We'll see you next month, and hopefully you'll have a great discussion today.
Thank you, Alor. So it's clear that equal status for women and other historical marginalized groups is not happening organically. Research tells us that widespread cultural transformation requires united community effort. However, before we get to solutions, leaders have to agree on how they will generate change together. So moderating today's discussion is Lonnie Lutar. Lonnie is president of Responsible Solutions, specializing in advocacy, coalition building, and government relations. Previously, she led the San Diego County Taxpayers Association, the Equinox Center, and the Asian Business Association of San Diego. Take it away, Lonnie.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate this opportunity to lead this discussion with this amazing, distinguished panel we have before us today. We have on our panel Dr. Akilah Weber. Akilah represents California's 79th Assembly District and serves on the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. She is also a board-certified OBGYN and former vice mayor for the city of La Mesa. Next, we have Susan Davis. Susan served 10 terms serving the 53rd U.S. Congressional District of Central San Diego, which means that she started at age 10, right, Susan? She currently works on issues of education and equity, workplace development, veterans, and health and human rights. And lastly, we have Catherine. Catherine is mayor of the city of Encinitas. She serves on many boards, including the Airport Authority Board, and is chair of SANDAG. Catherine is a practicing attorney and a former journalism reporter. Okay, so I will now open up the discussion. Equal workplace status means that every person is valued and respected equally as a human being, regardless of their personal or professional background. Once this is established as a company's cultural norm, employees receive the recognition and reward they deserve purely according to how they contribute to the company's success. Recently, legislators proposed the bill AB 1192 to require California employers with more than 1,000 employees to publicly disclose statistics regarding their human capital, such as pay, benefits, equity, etc., so we can track progress according to standardized metrics. It met with significant disapproval from the business community, particularly the California Chamber of Commerce. So our first question, which I will direct to Susan Davis, what do you think are some of the major factors preventing equal workplace status from happening faster despite reporting requirements like Title VII and EEOC?
Well, thank you, Lenny, and it's a pleasure to be here and to be part of this panel. I think the question that we're really asking is, how does legislation drive, or in many ways not drive, changes that really benefit everybody? And just very quickly, that Title VII was part of the civil rights legislation, and it set up the Equal Employer Opportunity Commission. I think that's an important word too in there, that it's opportunity, which is also what we're going to be talking about today. And so we do have this really vast data collection around demographics and sex, race, ethnicity, natural origin. And then we included other protections in amended legislation that protect women, protect gender identity, and they give people recourse. We know that laws are intended to give people remedy. So in these laws, we really are trying to capture the most grievous behavior that people experience in their workplace. And it's very important to do that. It's also important to know that companies over 100 individuals need to report. And right now, what's interesting is because of COVID, there's been a delay in reporting. So that's going to be interesting as we look at some of that data. So why don't things change? I mean, if we're working really hard to look at those issues, what effect does that really have? The thing that I would want to share is when we think about our entrenched history. I went to the Capitol during those 20 years that I served, and I was confronted with statues everywhere. And of course, we know today that there's a lot of talk about what statues represent to us. And we have 244 statues of men, 14 of women. So in addition to that beautiful symbol of our democracy, it's also a really strong reminder that not everybody, as you was mentioned earlier, is equally valued. And so that's why we're working so hard to try and figure out this change. I wanted to mention that being unlawful, of course, is different from not providing opportunity for people. I think that's going to be important in our discussion today. The biggest argument that I've heard from the business community to the state legislation, that was an effort to take federal legislation quite a few steps beyond. And that biggest argument for them is that it takes away from personnel and certainly from time, from other needs that perhaps would engage their employees more. We also know that they may not want to look at this data, and that's going to be an issue that is important for legislators to work with the business community to try and figure out what is important. What do we want to learn from that data, and how can we use it effectively? So I think that we need to recognize this is law that we're talking about, and sometimes people are concerned that they would be having a hard time really defining the grounds for those laws. But more than anything else, it is an effective way, I think, of us trying to understand, how can we invest in workers, and what is the best way to do that? And I think if we come at it in that way, then perhaps there's going to be a greater understanding of how important it really is for legislators and businesses to work together on these issues.
Mayor Blakespear or Assemblymember Weber, would either of you like to add on to the response to that question?
Sure, I will. And again, before I begin, I want to thank you so much for having me. Thank the Equal Rights Center and the Kim Center for Social Balance for organizing this very important discussion. I want to say welcome to all of my fellow panelists, and just thank everyone who's taken their time out to join or listen in on this conversation today. I think, when you look at things like Title VII and EEOC, those things that were put in place many, many years ago, I think it was 1964 with the Civil Rights Act. And since then, a lot has changed. And unfortunately, one of the things that you do see in government is that even though time has changed, sometimes government is much slower to change with the times. And so there are a few things that definitely need to be in place or implemented to make sure that the intention of Title VII and EEOC are actually implemented. First, we need to make sure that all of the data that's being collected is done in a timely fashion, but also that there's some transparency there. So it's hard to know sometimes if you're being discriminated against, or if your salary is different from your counterparts or someone who's working under you, if you don't even have that information. I think continuing to make sure that all of our workers, our employees are educated on what their rights are and what the laws state, and where they can go when to file a complaint, and make sure that filing the complaint is not as daunting as most government paperwork is. And then you also have to deal with the issues of actual enforcement, and that is what the EEOC is supposed to do. But there have been multiple studies that have shown that even though the workforce has increased since 1964, sometimes the funding to EEOC hasn't increased as it should have. And so they may not necessarily have the financial manpower to investigate all of the complaints correctly. And I think there was a study that came out recently over the last few years that showed that many of the complaints are actually being closed. They're not being investigated or mediated. They're actually being closed prematurely. And so, all of these things kind of compile into not being able to have the initial intended purpose of Title VII and EEOC actually implemented in our day-to-day policies in 2021.
Mayor Blake.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first, I also want to say thank you for tuning in today. And it's great to be on this panel with two esteemed women who are really have done great work and are doing great work at the federal level and the state level. And I'm thrilled as a local level, as a mayor, to be able to be on this panel with them. So I really want to thank the Kim Center and for organizing this and for being here today. I'm just grateful for that. So, I mean, I guess the thing that I am thinking about in relation to your question, and then the two who came before me, is that all of that 1960s civil rights legislation was aimed at trying to create more equality and more diversity and a greater opportunity for everybody who's an American to thrive and prosper and have the chance to live a self-actualized life. And so, the difficulties that we're facing, that we continue to face, or the progress that we have yet to make, I think goes back, there are some very lofty aspirations in the founding of our country, and then also that really important civil rights legislation in the 1960s. But it needs renewal, and it needs a recommitment, and it needs an understanding of its base. And the term that you're using of equal status is a new term, and it might be the term that we're evolving toward. But from my perspective, I do see diversity as an end goal, as a value, as saying we want to have all people represented at all levels, especially the levels that are making decisions. So the levels of power. And that is a goal just in and of itself. And really it comes down to the question of well, why is that a goal? It's really about justice. I feel like it's really about recognizing that all people have the ability and we should give them the opportunity to be able to shape the laws that govern them. And we're seeing, we have some very serious threats that we're currently facing in real time, particularly around voting rights, which was another area that was highly contested and resulted in legislation that persisted until the last presidential administration, and some recent Supreme Court decisions. But really, we need to recommit to that, and we need to have that understanding of equal status and diversity and equity and inclusion, and the ability for all people to be able to participate and to be sitting in the seats of power. Those need to be values that we embrace as a populace and as part of the American experiment, that we reinvest in it. And I think that in some ways we fling back and forth between this idea that we should somehow be colorblind, and there is no color, which I think is, or no gender, that's also part of the women's rights movement in our past, to a completely different analysis, which is that we need to recognize that there is value in that difference. And to say that difference is what we want to know more about, and that's a life experience, and that's a history, and we should make places for people intentionally who have not been able to set up roots in those communities or in those places, those halls of decision making at the federal and state level or local level. And that has to be done intentionally. So we can't just leave it to chance. And so I think what you're getting at is all of this data should be informing how do we intentionally create that different future. And it's certainly a worthy project. So I'm excited, to be here to talk about it today. So thank you.
Okay, on our second question, I will direct that to Dr. Weber. And it's a little bit of, if you could give us some insight on the legislative process in Sacramento as a bill is being created and being contemplated. So as a bill like AB 1192 is being crafted, how much time and effort is typically spent identifying its potential impacts, including unintended consequences to ensure its best chance for passage?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. That's actually an excellent question. So, different bills require different depths of engagement and different timeframes, from the initial conception of what the problem is into it actually being crafted into legislation, to it actually passing both houses and then going to the governor. And I think one of the things for people to remember is that in the Assembly, there are 80 Assembly members, and then the Senate, there's 40, and then we also have the governor. But we all come from different areas of California. We have different experiences, different backgrounds. Each of our areas have our own unique circumstances, and we have our different priorities. And so we all must come together to find common ground to really tackle some of these different issues. And so depending on how controversial or how widespread the impact of a particular piece of legislation would have, the time frame could be as short as one session, or it could take up to several years to get something done. So with a bill like AB 1192, it would often start with either a group or an individual identifying what the problem is and a problem that needs to be solved. And many organizers will oftentimes use something like the SWOT analysis, like the strength, weakness, opportunities or threats, or another method to identify the impact and the unintended consequences. For me personally, when someone comes to me to see if I would be interested in introducing a bill, I sit down and I, one, look at what the problem is, two, really look at what the intention of the bill would be and whether or not it would actually solve the problem that we're stating is out there. I always ask my people, okay, who would support this? Because it's important to have a coalition of supporters. But for me, it's even more so important to know who would oppose it, because I want to start having those conversations very early, oftentimes before the final bill is crafted and initially introduced, so that we can start having those discussions very early on. When the bill is initially introduced, hopefully dealing with some of the concerns that the opposition would have, and really making sure that people understand that regardless of whatever side they're on, this is a problem that needs to be solved, and we want to have input from everyone. And so, like I said before introducing it, it's really important that you build a very, very strong coalition of supporters, of stakeholders, and that is extremely important, because at some point, once it gets to the floor, you're going to need not only your staff, but also the stakeholders and the different organizations to help reach out to your fellow Assembly and Senate members to get their support as well. And hopefully to get whoever is in opposition to either go neutral, or, sometimes they'll even switch over and support the bill. And so it does at times take a lot of time and effort to successfully move a bill, especially something like AB 1192. But with the right intention, building your coalitions, working very closely with your opposition, coming in with an understanding of what you can give on and what you will not, because everything is a give and take. But there are some foundational principles that that you will not give on. And so understanding those from upfront is very important. And, above all else, have patience and not to get frustrated or deterred if your bill does not make it through after the first go around. But having all of those will often, over time, lead to some success.
Thank you so much for that insight. I think that was excellent advice. And think all of us that work in politics knows that it's the opposition that you need to really think about, right? And how can we work to get beyond some of the barriers that might come up, and are there opportunities to identify compromise? So that actually kind of leads into the next question for Mayor Blakespear, because the question is, how much time and effort should be spent first reaching out to employers to investigate what their challenges might be? Because as we know, again, the California Chamber of Commerce, at least on this bill, was one of the main opponents. And as we try to make changes in the workforce, and as Susan Davis said earlier, there's a lot of reasons why employers might not like these mandates that are being contemplated. And so would love your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of these things where the question is, are they opposed to it is it really because they think it takes too much time away from doing other things? Or is it because they think that data will be used to then have mandates that say you need to have 50% of your X type of employee be women? And then they're going to have to go out and try and find, more women when women aren't applying in the same numbers, or they're going to have some percentage that's a minority that is corresponds to the population of minority people who live in that community, or something like that. And so I think understanding what the opposition is coming from could be really useful, because if it really is that it's considered burdensome to create the data, there might be ways to make that less of a burden, or to streamline it and to essentially neutralize that opposition. But getting to the point where we are intentionally adding diversity, whether it's women or people of different races, ethnicities, or backgrounds, with intentionality. I mean, in many ways, this is the affirmative action conversation. And I think there was a strong effort in the last election to ask the voters to say, will you overturn a ban on affirmative action in California? And the voters said no. And I actually was surprised by that, I'll admit. I don't know if my ear was to the ground as much but I did think that identifying diversity and inclusion as a value would mean that you could consider that when you're thinking about admission to colleges, kind of explicitly, but the voters said no to that. So there are a lot of different ways to then try to work around it in ways that are legal, but it's still one of those questions where it comes down to some philosophical differences, where we're really talking about, are these things that we want to try to create legally, intentionally, with requirements or not? And so talking really deeply with the Chamber of Commerce and organizations that represent businesses, there's always a calculus of, are you going to be able to make progress, or do you just need to go around an organization that's opposed to it? And I think to the extent you can forge compromise, it's always better. So if you can really deeply understand the position of other people, then it is more likely that you'll be able to find that path. But it does depend on how much of a will there is to get there anyway, even if there is opposition.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I'll kind of open this up to all of you. One of the things that you spoke to was this issue of, is it too burdensome? But I think the question is, even if it is burdensome, how much do we value that enhanced diversity, right? But one of the things that I know I've seen at some public agencies when they're trying to enhance their EEOC numbers, especially in certain types of sectors of jobs or contracts, is that they will come back and say, and I know this from my experience having served as executive director of the Asian Business Association, they'll say, we really want your help because we simply aren't getting people to apply for this position who have an API background, or there's no one responding to these RFPs who have this background. And so, yes, it may be burdensome, but what are the things that, whether it's a public sector or private sector, that should, additional efforts that should be made? How far do we need to go? And why is that so critically important? And anyone, if you want to raise your hand, take that question.
Well, Lanny, one of the things that I think that question really implies is, what's the role of leadership in the business? and what position are they taking? Because I think that it's so critical for a leader, see whatever title that individual has, that is the perceived person kind of behind the business, and that really has its success tied to the employees particularly, is that person's vision. And I think it's for individuals that are trying to help out, or that they're looking to talk about these issues, that's going to be an important one to try and engage, and then to be able to ask, what would it look like in your business if in fact people have had a strong sense of loyalty, that they were encouraging other people to consider working there. I mean, there are all kinds of measures. And I think one of the roles that Congress can play, and actually more likely in the state, is to try and develop some incentive packages, perhaps that sort of offset the kinds of issues that the EEOC tries to capture. What would that look like? How do we define it, and what steps are necessary to achieve that? And perhaps that's done in a process that everybody in the business can begin to have some input. Obviously, size of a business has a lot to do with that, but I think just trying to help walk in one another's shoes a little bit, what's important, what would make a difference, and where do you feel that employees feel that they don't get a fair shot in that business? How would you like to change that? Because I think most people, are well-intentioned, and they do want to bring about those changes, do better recruiting, have a more positive image in the community. And that's a role that I think legislators can actually help play that role. That's not always easy, but it is something to have a goal of, I think.
Thank you for providing that insight. And I think that's an excellent point. Again, leadership, whether it's on the private sector or the public sector side, can make all the difference.
I really appreciate that answer from Congresswoman Susan Davis, or Representative Susan Davis. One of the things that businesses have the opportunity to do is to actually not just be in a community, but be a part of the community. And when you are actually a part of the community, then the community, the members. And so when you are looking to diversify your employees, then you know where to go, and you know who to talk to, and you know where the different racial, ethnic, gender groups are. And so I think that's so very important. Oftentimes businesses, they come into a community and they're just there without actually giving as much as they possibly can, and really becoming a part of that community, so that ultimately their employees look like the community that they're in, look like the community that they serve, whether it's a public employer or a private employer. I think that's so very important when we're talking about equity, equality, and diversity. Looking at your area and being a part of that area, and allowing for your business to look like the people that's around them.
Thank you again for those additional excellent thoughts. And Dr. Mayor Blakespear, did you want to respond, or are you okay with me moving on to the next question? Because it's similar. It continues on with the thought. Okay. It said that California sets the stage for employment laws in the rest of the country, but are we also providing too much incentive to lawyers to find violations? Can this hurt the equal workplace status movement here and elsewhere?
I don't know if I see that California is hurting the movement here and elsewhere. I think, and this is partly an answer to the previous question as well, but it really it takes will and commitment and identification of it as a value, and then work at every level. Like, I think when I think about, like, for example, in my city, the boards and commissions, and my ongoing and true effort to have more women participate in those, and the reality that there are a lot more men applicants for every commission, than there are, especially the commissions that are the most important, like planning, traffic. The ones, that are art or environment might be, which are also important, but they have less of a policy role in a city, that really trying to intentionally create that diversity is something that takes personal will. And I think it's just really important that we all, to go back to what both of my colleagues have said, which were great points about leadership and needing to make sure that the businesses in the community embrace the community that they are in and promote it and have it be an intertwining and not just a plopping down in that community. So, I think it really does take all of us. There are a lot of individual actions, and then formalized structures of pipelines. I think the labor movement has done that really well, where there's an identification of a job at the end and then all of the different things that you need to get to that job. And so there's a clear pipeline. And I think that probably needs to happen with this as a goal as well.
Thank you for providing those insights. I'm going to move on to the next question just so that I can make sure we cover as much as possible today. Dr. Weber, what do you think employers need to understand better about why and when legislators step in to mandate a culture of equal status?
So thank you so much for that question. Employment laws are not arbitrarily created just because people want to make up laws. These laws are often created after, employees have already suffered multiple forms of discrimination. And it's oftentimes not just employees at one particular institution. It's often something that is more widespread than that. And so, when there is a history of workplace inequities that just do not organically fix themselves, nor do the employers actively implement metrics on their own to improve the working conditions, then yes, legislatures must step in to resolve the problems. It is our responsibility, our charge to serve all of our constituents. And in the California state legislative body, we're there to serve all of Californians. And so, employers do have the ability to be proactive to ensure that the culture of equal status without legislative intention, and that would be the best case scenario. But when that does not happen, it is our responsibility to protect the employees because they are residents of the state of California.
Thank you for sharing that. And that makes a lot of sense, that you're probably hearing from a lot of different type of constituent groups that are coming to you, sharing what some of the inequities are and what some of the problems are. You're not just coming up with these ideas. Sometimes you may be coming up with them on your own, but I think more often than not, you're responding to concerns and complaints from the community and from your constituents. That makes sense. Does anybody else want to weigh in on that specific question? Okay.
Yeah, I'll just second that. The point of the work is to solve problems. So yeah, it really is. Maybe it's a little bit intentionally naive to say that we're just creating laws to create laws. Everything is coming back to trying to solve a problem that there's some group that is experiencing, and that's why there is a law. So I appreciate it. Our assembly member bringing that up, that it's not just because it seems like a good idea out of nowhere. It's because it's trying to solve a problem.
I guess the thing that's important too is that it has to be a good idea for the business. And that's what's sometimes difficult. They don't always go right together, but it has to be in their best interest, and the extent to which one can be skillful enough to really find that best interest for all the stakeholders, not just for some of them, is really important. And that's hard. It's hard to do that. But on the other hand, I think when you when you're able to start from a position of how can we make things better here for everybody, then often you can try and move that discussion a little bit. But clearly, if people are, if there's a pattern of discrimination that's going on, it may be cultural, and it may need a transformation for that reason, but it's also unlawful. And it's very important for legislators to step in at that place and to really make that clear.
A follow-up question that I was thinking about for you, Susan, earlier Akilah was saying that, it often takes more than one session to pass a bill in Sacramento. And so again, just because you have constituents that raise concerns or because there's a problem doesn't mean that it's easy to then get this legislation passed. I would love your, thoughts, and if you could give us insight into, in DC, how long, would it take realistically to get these type of laws passed? Because I imagine it's even more challenging than Sacramento.
Well, I think it is for a variety of reasons that we're probably aware of. Number one is just the sheer numbers of people that you have to influence. And, I started on the school board, so I only had to influence 2 other people to get a 3-2 vote, if that was in the way something was going to turn out. And then going into the state legislature and Congress. And that does make a difference, but that's part of the role that people have in building coalitions that Akilah was mentioning earlier really is critical. There are sometimes we often say, there's really nothing new because people are put in a position year in and year out to sometimes bring forth legislation that everybody has agreed, or budget development that everybody has agreed is critical and important, but they can't get the job done. You just have to stay with it. I'm often really I'm so in awe of some members who have gone year in and year out trying to do that. I mean, just one example that comes to mind is the Equal Rights Initiative, and the fact that even for women, even though we acknowledge that we have worked on a lot of issues together, and a lot of them are around employment and equal pay, equal treatment under the law. At the same time, we can't get through an equal rights amendment after all these years that people agree to have formalized, have acknowledged by representatives throughout the entire country. And so yes, sometimes we have to keep working on things. Childcare is another area that comes to mind right now. It's endless, truly. And it does take persistence, but that's the process. And we just have to be willing, I think, to find new ways that people can understand the critical nature of a piece of legislation.
Thank you so much. Our next question. So I will direct this to Susan again. The Kim Center's LEAPS initiative is designed to benchmark progress every 3 years. What is the first goal you think employers and legislators can realistically agree to achieve together in 6 or 12 months?
Yeah, I think that first goal is really to agree on the problem. Where do they want to go? We have the EEOC, we have the reporting that needs to be done. There certainly will be different pieces of state legislation that comes forward. But it's really about vision. How do we define equitable within the workplace? What kinds of opportunities are being missed? And when they're missed, that means that the company is not able to be as productive as it would like to be, and how important it is to change the measures of whether or not people are moving forward. So I think there's, it's really to sort of understand the playing field and to help people come forth with a way of really checking their progress. And the hope would be that in that period of time, people can hit on maybe 3 metrics that are important to them. And that perhaps even are in that realm of investing, that there's more education, there's more training, there's more opportunities for people to get the kind of technical support that they need. What is it that would make a difference, and what are their competitors doing? I think that's also another big issue that one can use to try and broaden many of the efforts that businesses have, and that really do impact families and create the kind of diversity and inclusion that's necessary in order to have a productive business. And that's the case that always needs to be made. That's why I think as a country, we have to go in that direction because we'll be better for it.
Thank you for your insights. Mayor Blakespear or Dr. Weber, would you like to add on to that? I see Mayor.
Yeah, I mean, I think she said it exactly right, which is I really focusing in on like, what are we solving for? I think what do we identify as the problem and what is it that we are working toward? And I mean, the equal status phrase creates this, in my mind, it creates this question of like, well, what exactly is the definition of our unequal status? Is that a race gender thing? Is that a economic issue? Is that something to do with particular backgrounds like homelessness or other people who have not experienced privilege at such high levels? You know, so there are, it asks a lot of questions, I think. And I mean, to me, like my personal feeling, I go back to like thinking about what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said. She said, all women belong at all levels where decisions are being made. And to me, the fact that at the highest levels of every single industry, at all the Fortune 500 companies, at the highest levels of government, at every level of the highest levels of government, there are 2/3 men and on a good day, 1/3 women, not even probably that, a lot of times 5%, 10%. And the idea that, you know, that we should be really aiming 50% of this country is female. Like there's absolutely no reason that we shouldn't have 50% of all decisions being made by women and bringing their life experience, their experience as mothers or non-mothers, their experience of walking through the world as a female. And I think that applies to all of the different categories and groups of people and ways that people identify. And, you know, disability, transgender, homelessness, like all the different areas where people experience othering or exclusion and are not in that privileged class. But it's extremely hard to get there. And so having some consensus, at least that's a goal, I think is certainly a worthy pursuit and is probably where it should start.
Thank you, Mayor. I know that Dr. Weber has to leave a little bit early. So we're gonna, before we go to questions from the audience, we're gonna go to each panelist for a closing question. And I think we do have a little bit more time than initially contemplated, so you don't have to feel rushed on this. But here's the question. What is one collaborative accomplishment you would like to see employers and legislators achieve together for equal workplace status at the 3-year mark? And before I take the first response to that, I would like to remind the audience that there will be Q&A as I noted earlier. And so you can participate on Facebook to submit your questions, and those will be directed to me to ask of the panelists. So again, encourage any questions that you may have for any specific panelists or for all of the panelists. And I'll go ahead and repeat the question for all of you. What is one collaborative accomplishment you would like to see employers and legislators achieve together for equal workplace status at the 3-year mark? And how about we start with, well, we'll go Susan Davis, Mayor Blakespear, and then Dr. Weber. And we should have, you need to leave by 2:50, correct, Dr. Weber? Okay, actually, I might switch that up and go Susan, Akila, and then Catherine, if that's okay.
Well, I think I spoke a little bit about that, just thinking about even in a 6-month or 1 year, what would you like to see people achieve? But when it comes to the kind of collaborative that we're talking about, one of the great opportunities that legislators always have is to establish grants and incentives for businesses, for communities to come together and to really engage in just across the board, you know, a number of agencies. So I think because this issue, the whole issue of work is tied up in who we are. I mean, it really is what makes people feel like they want to get up in the morning and they want to connect and to make a contribution as well as supporting their families. Then I think this is something, whether it's housing and childcare, you know, what what could we work on together that includes those kinds of grants? And I think that everybody is familiar with, the kind of a grant that really engages community well. There are grants that I think people can play with that do not have that kind of impact. But I think that's what we're looking for. So I think I would love to see, what is it that everybody cares about that is common and that would make a difference for them if in fact there was an opportunity to gain, maybe it's additional funding, but maybe it has other ways of helping companies to do a better job recruiting. Maybe that's the highest goal that they have, and how do they involve their employees in that? There are so many ways that people can do that, and also helping to make the case of what changes are made. And I think that job enhancement is something, a vague notion, but it perhaps is something that would be possible to come together and have data make that case, where the company has grown, how people have grown in their position, how career ladders, those kinds of things.
Thank you for that input. Dr. Weber.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And thank you once again for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I do have to jump off a little early because I have to pick my kids up from school, but I really appreciate being invited in this very important discussion. Honestly, I would love to see a collaboration between employers and legislators on the issue of affirmative action. And I know that Mayor Blakespear mentioned that earlier. Even though Title VII is federal law, we know that inequalities and inequities still exist and continue to be perpetuated. And so we have to figure out a way to intentionally create a culture of equal status. As stated, I'm on the California Commission for the Status of Women and Girls. I'm also a member of the Legislative Women's Caucus and also a member of the California Legislative Black Caucus. And in all three of those different caucuses, we're fighting for continued workplace equity to close the gender and racial wage gap, where women of color are significantly, continuously making less than their white male counterparts who do the same job, the exact same job. And so, we tried to do this through a ballot proposition. And I think that whenever you put something on the ballot, it really depends on the messaging as to whether or not people will vote for or against it, which may have nothing to do with whether or not the actual issue itself is valid. And I don't necessarily think that this is an issue that should have to go to the ballot. It is something that legislators and employers should want to work together to do. I mean, studies have shown that when you have a workplace that has equity and is diverse, that you're more productive, that you're actually more relevant, that you are able to attract the best talent, and that you're able to attract better investors or consumers, depending on what your actual business model is. And so coming together and really figuring out how we can make California a place where we don't need an affirmative action by law or by ballot, because it's something that legislators and employers come together to realize that this is something that would be better for California overall. And we can use that as a model for the rest of the country to see that you can have a place where, you have equality in terms of who is there, between your race and your gender, and that there is no inequities in wage gap. And you see it up and down, not just at one level, but from the people who are running the company to the people who come in and clean up at the end of the day. And so it is extremely important to me. And that would be something that I would love to see us legislators and employers be able to work on over the next 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've given you just a couple minutes in time so that you can pick your kids up on time. Thank you again so much for joining us and sharing all of your fantastic insights, especially, insights from Sacramento that I'm sure all of the folks that are joining us virtually on Facebook appreciate hearing from you. And thank you for the work you are doing on behalf of all of San Diego and the region and your constituents. Okay. I will continue. Actually, my apologies, Mayor Blakespear, we have not gotten to you on that question yet. I almost got ahead of myself.
No, it's okay. I think she answered that in a great way, and we should just end that on her answer, because that was, I think, I'll second that.
Okay, give me 1 second here I saw that we did have some questions from the audience. Okay, here is our question. What should legislators' response be to companies saying they'll leave the state if more legislation or regulations are brought on? That's one I think we frequently hear, you know, whether it's Tesla reducing their workforce size. They said they didn't leave the state, but they're certainly reducing their workforce here. Other employers, I feel like every year you hear this come up, right? That employers are going to leave, and some are. But you know, what is the response that legislators should be saying to those folks?
You know, I think it really does get back to the reason that one needs to build relationships with people even when they don't agree with them. And I think continuing that conversation, because there's a lot more behind that. Obviously, we're talking about businesses who have been here often for a long time. Yes, of course, they'd rather not have to deal with certain regulations, but trying to really define, okay, which ones of those maybe could we get rid of? And trying, you know, there's a middle ground often there. And sometimes, you know, quite frankly, like you said, you just can't come to agreement. But I think that it may be that there's something else down the road that brings you together in a way that changes things. You may be talking about a company that's, you know, they are going to leave because their bottom line, that's all they're looking at. But they also need to find a way to engage their community of employees, because they may end up with the same problems that they're having here in California, elsewhere. So part of it is really keeping the conversation going, I think, when you run into these kind of roadblocks.
Thank you, Susan. Mayor Blakespear?
Yeah, you know, I was just thinking that one of the things that that question, you can also apply it like at the next level up. Like, how do we keep companies from leaving America to go to China or some other place where they maybe aren't as strict on child labor laws or environmental pollution, or, you know, and it kind of speaks to the need to have a whole, all of our states have certain standards when it comes to labor, a living wage, you know, paying someone who's working full time, having enough money to afford housing and food and medical care, you know, all the structural parts of our economy. And then, you know, you can take it up a level, saying everybody in the world all countries should have certain standards that are applied to companies and workers. And so, you know, it is a very difficult conversation and situation. I think that the Congresswoman is right, that having relationships and having a deeper dialogue, and it's very complex. I mean, it's not like those decisions are made kind of as they can seem in the media, like somebody does a tweet and the next day somebody, you know, one of our major companies leaves the state. And, you know, it's hard to really think that it's that simple. And just knowing how complex human relationships are, especially when there are a lot of humans involved, it just seems to me like there's more going on. So yeah, I mean, I think it's important. California is a diverse place that has a lot of vitality and a lot of opportunity. And we do get bogged down with things like our housing costs and our, you know, you hear employers who say, or people who say, I'm not taking a job in California because I can't afford to live near that work. And so how do we deal with some of those things could be as much of issues as the regulation or the taxation or the other areas that sometimes can be scapegoated. So I just think it's, you know, we have to be continually working toward that greater good together and building those relationships, and also trying to create an equitable world, you know, being committed to that as an ultimate goal.
Yeah, as we were, you know, talking about this, well, the topic is different. I think about I was involved in advocacy to eliminate plastic bags in the city of San Diego. And this was actually before the rest of the state. And some of the arguments that we heard was that, bringing our own bags, recycled bags, would be unsanitary. And yet, sometimes you have to get over the hump. The local jurisdiction passes law, and then everybody else realizes, oh, this is actually a cool thing, and it's really making a difference. And so, again, both of you talked earlier about leading by example. And so I think there are opportunities is even around issues that might seem challenging at first or burdensome at first, that if you can have a pilot program or have a smaller jurisdiction or even a state demonstrate that it can be done successfully, then it allows the rest of the nation to follow. And I don't think that's, necessarily a bad thing, but now I'm sharing my perspective. So I will get back to you all. So one of the questions that we got includes, what are employers missing in their understanding about those who experience discrimination? It's a good question.
Well, I think that I think they're not realizing how critical it is to their business that people are feeling safe in their workplace and not distracted by, sometimes it may be unconscious bias, but nevertheless, that they're experiencing something that is getting in the way of their being productive and essentially happy on the job. I would think that that's always should be important to businesses. And again, it's largely a matter of leadership and how people can come together and not necessarily confront, but try and understand, is there a way that we can really measure how people are doing here in this workplace? In the military, they have a lot of, I think, environmental surveys. How is the individual there leading their unit, leading their troops, and an opportunity for people to respond. I know there are certainly many businesses that have suggestion boxes, etc. But I think that it is important to make the case that people are not complaining because they're just want more money necessarily. There's something that is making it difficult for them to carry on their work, and perhaps they're not given some of the opportunities that they feel other people are getting. Again, we get back to issues of gender, issues of race, issues of age discrimination, and I think that's when it's important for people to work with that within the companies. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily something that we can legislate when it comes to issues that do not amount to a kind of unlawful act, but something that actually is just burdensome to everybody.
Yeah, it's almost a cultural norm that I hear you describing.
Yeah, and cultural transformation takes time, but it also means that one of the things that I'm just very pleased over the years to have seen is that women are we always say women have to be asked 7 times to run for office. I think now we're down to about 3 times. I think it's more commonplace. And that is not just in running for office, but in being more aggressive about getting what they deserve on the job. And I think that there are ways that working in the community that, legislators can ask about those issues and try and understand them. The other thing that I think happens more frequently today is that people go to workplaces and they have town halls with people who work there, and that really helps you to sort of understand and maybe have an opportunity to follow up on issues that may be of concern at that particular workplace and in that particular profession.
Thank you. Mayor Blakespear, if you want to give a quick response to that, and then I think we'll be having closing remarks from Dr. Kim.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, the only thing, she answered that extremely well. And the only thing I would just add is that it does seem to me like we really need to be doing analyses of structural racism. There's structural issues that create a disparate impact on certain populations. So when there are not any of some particular, there's nobody who's older, there's nobody who is a woman, there's nobody who's a minority in a certain workplace, there's probably a structural reason behind that. And so trying to evaluate that really with clear eyes is something really, I think, is what we need to do. So because there are, that it's not really about like individual actions, which is what our mind immediately goes to when you think about something that is a racist or sexist incident or something. But really, when the question about like what are employers missing, I think really it has to be a structural analysis.
No, thanks for that. I mean, that's great because things add up.
Right.
And we talk about systemic problems always, and the way that the company was organized or has remained. The fact that they don't have young people coming into the business. I think that's also an indication of a business that's in trouble, frankly. And so we need to do what we can to try and create more interest within the community to do that and to learn from it.
You both raised many, many excellent points. With that, I will turn it over back to Dr. Kim to close out the program. Thank you for allowing me to moderate today's discussion. Appreciate it.
Thanks to all of our amazing participants. Mayor Blakespear, I know you also have to sign off and go get your kids, so please feel free to do so. And thanks to our audience for joining us for this episode of Uniting for Workplace Parity. We hope you'll like and share this post and add your questions or thoughts to the comments. We will get to them as they come in. And then please join us for part 3 of How Can Employers and Legislators Create Change Together? It's on November 16th, and we will bring legislators and employers face to face to brainstorm in real time on effective collaboration. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Bye.